Hi, folks. This is Pastor Charles here in Huntsville, Alabama. For a long time, I've been wanting to possibly start some type of a podcast of my own where I could share some thoughts. We live at the moment in a very tumultuous time, and things are quite harried, not only in the political arena, but also in the church, mainly because there are people in this country who for decades have tried to marry the church to a singular political party, that party being the Republican Party. And the Republican Party clearly these days has gone rogue, and there's so much conflict and confusion and infighting and just insanity going on within the Republican Party today. And we need a voice of reason, a Christian voice of reason. No believer who's trying to live for God according to the Word of God is interested in conflict, in bickering, debating, backbiting, accusing, conspiracy, all of these things that we see going on today, especially by people who are trying to call themselves Christians, is just, utter and sheer insanity. The Word of God tells us to follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. The identifying earmark of a child of God is their capacity to love. And not just to love one another, not just to love those who love us in return. The Lord himself said, even sinners love those who love them. But it is our capacity to love not only our brethren, but to love those who are outside of the church. As children of God, we are to be peacemakers and not rabble-rousers. It is not our calling to go out and stir up angst and anger. It is not our calling to walk in angst and anger. We're supposed to walk in peace. We're supposed to walk in the joy of the Lord. No matter what's going on in the political arena, we understand, according to the Word of God, that God enables leaders to be exalted and to be elevated. And of course, many in the evangelical and fundamentalist worlds claim to believe this, unless, of course, it's a Democrat who is elected to president, and then all of a sudden Satan has won the day, which is always funny to me, because when people are upset at something a Republican president is doing, the grand old party will tell us, calm down, no matter who's in charge, God is in control. But then let a Democrat get elected, all of a sudden that whole concept goes out the window, and all we hear is panic and fear, angst, and negativity and conspiracy and all this insanity. Well, anyway, having said that, I believe it's important in this current environment that someone in the Christian community speak as a child of God to current events, but with the intent of establishing understanding and opening eyes, not with the intent of angering one set of people at another set of people and this sort of thing. So, for my very first cast, for a very long time, I've wanted to do this, and this particular podcast is going to be probably longer than most. I plan on doing a number of them, probably in the same day, but I'm going to cut them up into smaller pieces so they'll just be like 10-minute or less chunks that I then can also I can also share on other social platforms as well. So today, however, there's a very important subject that I want to talk about, because I really believe too many Christians today are just not taking this issue seriously enough. They're not understanding that, especially when this preacher warns concerning the candidacy or the potential presidency of one Donald Trump. People always, human nature is such that it always looks for the easiest answer. And the easiest answer, my friend, a lot of times is the least correct answer. And it takes someone of intellect, it takes someone who actually has the ability to think, to realize that what appears to be the simplest answer is not always the right answer. And so, having said that, people who want to discredit what I have to say about the candidacy and the campaign of Trump and the new Nazi party, MAGA, M-A-G-A, Make America Great Again, they want to simply say, well, he has a political agenda. He doesn't agree with Trump's policies, blah, blah, blah. And I've tried to explain over and over and over again. I was a true blue Reagan Republican back in the 1980s. That is when I first was old enough to vote. I loved Ronald Reagan. Now, mind you, I've looked back over the years and come to realize that a lot of things went on that I really was too young at the time to pay attention to, sadly. And so I am not saying that I'm quite as big a fan today as I was then. But in the 1980s, I registered as a Republican. I was a Republican for many years. Even after I came out, I remained associated with the Republican Party. However, it became obvious to me at one point that when Fox News came into existence, I don't know, maybe I'm just too discerning to be taken in by these things. But I noticed that certain talk show hosts, like especially Rush Limbaugh and the like, and Sean Hannity and all of these, they were constantly coming at things from a position of anger, and they were constantly presenting everything as, well, the answer's clear, the answer's obvious, it's this overly simplified response to every circumstance. And the spin that they put on everything related to Democrats was growing more and more wicked. It was becoming much more combative. All of a sudden, it was becoming good versus evil, us versus them. And everything they do, and every one of them are wicked, and every one of them are evil. And I began to see these things happening early on. Fox wasn't around very long before I noticed that this was the trend. And I said, no, something's wrong here. Something is desperately wrong here. This is not the kind of spirit that God's people associate themselves with. The Word of God teaches us not to keep company with an angry man. And so I recognized that all this anger and all this angst that was coming over the airwaves was contrary to Christian living. And this was not something that as a believer I was supposed to be associating myself with, because all it did was stir up emotions that were contrary to faith. Fear is not faith, folks. Fear is contrary to faith. And so the more fear that these people, and constantly you would hear them saying, you should be afraid, you should be afraid, you should be afraid of this, you should be afraid of that. And one of their most popular arguments was a slippery slope. This opens the door to a slippery slope. And one thing that I tend to be very keenly aware of is hypocrisy. I don't know why, but hypocrisy is something that I tend to pay a lot of attention to. It is not something that is lost on me. I'm going to fix this camera a little bit. Hypocrisy is not something that is quickly lost on me. To be honest with you, I grew up in a family with a family member, one in particular, I'm not going to go into details, who would go to church and everybody just thought she was wonderful and she was loving and she was so sweet and oh, she's so pretty and blah, blah, all these wonderful positive things. And yet the minute she left the church house, she was a screaming, cussing lunatic who would beat her children and curse them and cuss them and tell them she wished they had never been born and all kinds of negative and horrible, horrible things. So, and I used to look at this and I'd say, my God, how in the world can somebody live such conflict and such contrast and frankly, such hypocrisy? And living with this situation kind of made me keenly aware of people talking one thing but not walking what they were talking. And so I tend to look at everything kind of a certain way. And I look at things that people will say, and a lot of times the first thought that comes into my head is, okay, I hear what they're saying as it relates, for instance, to a Democrat, but what if a Republican were doing the exact same thing? Would they be saying the same exact thing? And of course, oftentimes, over the course of time, we see, because eventually there is a Republican who's doing the same exact thing, and all of a sudden these Republicans change their tune, and they're saying the complete opposite of everything they had been saying. So things like this really get on my nerve, and I began to see this increasingly, thanks in great part to Fox. I began to see this especially coming from the Republican Party. And frankly, in the 1990s, I decided I was bailing out. I no longer wanted to be associated with the Republican Party. And I left. I became an independent. And only in recent years did I formally become a Democrat. Because I felt that I could best help lend my efforts to steering our country in the right direction through the Democratic Party. Now, having said all that, if you dismiss everything I say because you simply want to believe that I have an agenda, you are doing yourself a great disservice. You're trying to find an easy answer to dismiss what I might have to say. And I'm telling you right now, folks, you are really messing yourself up by doing so. For many years, I had a second Facebook account. I had it under my pre-married name and everything. And I think I may have used Chuck instead of Charles. And I did this because, coming from a fundamentalist evangelical background, there were many friends and family members that I really wanted to stay in touch with. However, I did not want to constantly have them posting negative and nasty things to my Facebook timeline, where I'm connected to so many members of the LGBT community. And I knew that there was a potential for conflict. So I thought wisdom dictated that in order to stay in touch with these folks from my past that I wanted to stay in touch with, that I would create a second account. It was obviously much, much, much smaller than my primary account. And on that account, I tended to be much more political. I posted a whole lot more related to politics and what have you than I do on my my present Facebook account. And I can tell you, I'm going to say some things that it's going to irritate a lot of people. And I know how people are. They're so reactionary. They're so emotional. They can't stop for half a second and just think with any reason. You know, we have to just be hysterical and go off the rails every time somebody says something we don't appreciate or we don't agree with. But if you'll listen to what I'm saying, you might actually understand why I'm saying it. When Barack Obama began his campaign, his first campaign, I was very uncomfortable. To be honest with you, he did not win me over. I felt that he came across as very, very cocky. He was marketed as hope. I'll never forget how many times I saw various campaign ads and stuff, hope, and it had his face. And that troubled me immensely. I said, no. I don't care if you market somebody as the future. I don't care if you market somebody as progressive. I don't care if you market them as moving forward. But marketing them as hope, in my mind, was applying to them a almost spiritual attribute. Hope is a spiritual attribute. That is something, hope is something that comes from God. My hope is in the Lord. I felt very uncomfortable with the way he was marketed. Race was absolutely not an issue for me. There were men going back to the 80s, black men that were popular in the political world at the time that I would have voted for in a split second. So race was not at all the issue for me. And there are going to be people who are going to try to say, oh, that's what it was. That's what it was. That is not what it was. But I was just very uncomfortable with certain things. There were other factors because I take a lot into account. When I voted, I put a lot of thought into who I voted for. I understand that when someone goes to Washington and walks into the White House, they are going to be ineffective if they do not have connections, friendships, alliances that they have built over the years in the House and in the Senate. And I don't like when a first term anybody in Washington immediately wants to turn around. They hadn't even finished their first term as senator in Barack Obama's case. And immediately he's wanting to run for president. That doesn't settle well with me. I don't care for that. Because Washington and our constitutional republic is a difficult place. our government is by no means an easy thing to navigate through. The way that our founders designed our government to work, it is not easy. You have to have friends, you have to have alliances on the other side of the aisle, and that takes time. It takes time to build those alliances and to build those friendships. And I just felt that at the time, Barack Obama had not been in office long enough. He had not built friendships. He had not established alliances. He didn't have enough connections, so to speak, to be able to negotiate with the other side and get things done. And frankly, being a person of color, that was going to be something that even more than most he was going to have because of racism, because of so many racists within the Republican Party. I don't believe for a second that all Republicans are racists, or all racists are Republicans for that matter. But anyway, so long story short, I was not a big fan. I was not a proponent of Barack Obama as he ran for his first term. However, while all my old evangelical and fundamentalist friends were just railing and carrying on about Obama and, all this foolishness, I was advocating on his behalf to the extent that I kept saying, folks, when he won the election, I said, our system is set up. There are guardrails. There are safeguards, we're going to be fine. This man, it's not that he is entirely unqualified. It's just that I would have liked to have seen somebody maybe with a little bit more experience, a little bit more time in Washington, a little bit more friendships and alliances established not only within his own party, but also across the aisle. There were a number of factors, and I was a voice of reason, folks, during that time on my other Facebook profile. And, I had family members, the world was coming to an end, everything was going to just fall apart and blah, blah, blah. And my attitude was, well, let me wait and see. Let me see how the man does. I'm not, like I said, it's not that I didn't believe he was intelligent and potentially capable of the job, but I was afraid there were other factors that were going to stymie him. And in effect, at many levels, some of those factors did stymie him. So anyway, when he ran for a second term, I voted for him because at that point I felt he had proven himself. He showed me that he was certainly capable of doing the job, and I felt like he had done a pretty decent job. I was fairly happy with most everything he did, not always happy with how he went about everything, to be honest, but I was okay with him, and I felt comfortable voting for him. So the second time around, I did vote for him. And again, there were people, my family members and old friends, all these evangelical and fundamentalist folks that I've known my whole life, they're just railing and going off, And again, I was trying to speak calm to the situation. I was trying to be a peacemaker. I was trying to bring reconciliation, because that is what I believe we believers are called to do. So to sit and suggest that, I'm just an alarmist and, everything he says is just based on political leanings and blah, blah, blah. No, not at all. when people on my main Facebook profile were having fits because George W. Bush, for instance, was not pro-gay marriage and all this. I was constantly saying to people back then, folks, my goodness, if you understand how our democracy works, if you understand how our constitutional republic works, then you would not be panicked over the position that this president is taking. Because frankly, his position means nothing. It amounts to a hill of beans. Doesn't mean a thing in the world. I said, ultimately, this is one of those issues that is going to be settled in the Supreme Court. I said, watch, you'll see. This is the type of issue that ultimately is going to be settled in the Supreme Court. So a president's position on this issue means absolutely nothing. All he's doing is pandering to his base because he needs to secure his base's support for the next election. And that, that's it. It's politics. And you have to understand the nature of politics. Well, I would say all this, when Republicans were in office, I was trying to speak calm to the Democratic side. When Democrats in office, I was trying to speak calm to the Republican side. I was not being hypocritical because the same identical things I said to the Democrats, I said to the Republicans. When Donald Trump came along, the situation became very, very different. The reason the situation became very different is because of the quality and the character and the nature of the man. Our democracy was designed in such a way that it works perfectly as long as men and women of goodwill are operating on both sides of the aisle from the position of we are trying to do what's best for our country. One of the things that prevents our government from working effectively is, quite frankly, most individuals who go to Washington to serve in a federal post, in other words, congressmen, senators, presidents, not presidents so much, but the Congress and the Senate, they do not understand that their obligation is, yes, to represent their state, but they are there to represent their state as it relates to federal policy. What happens is we get senators and congressmen who go to Washington, and they are so concerned about the next election that they do not represent their state. They do not represent the nation on behalf of their state. They represent their state, and in so doing, they wind up throwing all kinds of kinks into the works for things that might benefit the nation as a whole. The problem is there are going to be issues at any given moment in time that are going to affect one or two states in a negative way, and yet they're going to have a positive impact on the nation as a whole. But if these representatives who are elected within their states come to Washington, and all they're constantly trying to do is make sure they get voted back in again by representing the so-called interests of their state and not the interests of the nation, then we are constantly in this state of gridlock. We are constantly in a state of get nothing done. Nothing gets done. Joe Manchin has been a perfect example of this. And Christian Cinema as well have been perfect examples of this. They, without fail, will be working against legislation and against actions that the Democrats are trying to get done with President Biden. And it's all because of issues that are specific to their states. The problem is senators and congressmen are supposed to be leaders. A leader does not interfere with the advancement of the nation as a whole in order to protect some small interest within his state. A leader is going to do what is best for us as a nation, and then he or she is going to go back to their state, and they're going to have to make the case. They're going to have to explain. They're going to have to offer an education, as it were, to their constituency and help them understand why this matter is so important at a national level that we as a state may have to make certain compromises, or we may have to accept certain repercussions or certain circumstances, in reaction to this item of national interest. But what we find is that congressmen and senators are more interested in power and position than they are doing the job. And so they go to Washington. All they're interested in doing is securing money for the next election, securing votes in the next election. And so the business of the country fails because they're not interested in the business of the nation. All they're interested in ultimately is the business of their state. That is one major issue that we have. Secondly, we have people who do not understand that we do not have a dictator. We do not have a king. And a president does not have absolute power to simply dictate and mandate what is to be done. Our system does not work that way. We have a system of checks and balances, okay? And so what happens is every time people go to the polls and they elect, today they elect a Democratic president. The next election, they're voting for a Republican. And they're voting for a Republican because, well, after all, the Democrat didn't get everything done that I wanted him to get done. Folks, you're operating on the premise that somehow this man has magic powers and he can do things that are way beyond his ability to get done. And people do not take into account, is this president working with a cooperative Congress, a Senate? Is he working with a combative Senate and Congress? You cannot elect, for instance, a Republican to the White House and Democrats to the House and Senate and expect that that Republican is actually going to be able to get a whole lot done. At least not not exactly what they may have promised or what they may have proposed when they were running for office, okay? What at best they're going to have to make compromises. At best they're going to have to come down a little on their position, and the other side is going to have to come up a little on their position, until you strike a compromise. If you want to see Democratic policies actually, whether or not they actually succeed, then it would be imperative that you elect a Democratic president and a cooperative House and Senate. You cannot give a president an uncooperative House and Senate and expect that they're going to be able to get a whole lot done. Just doesn't work that way. And then there are people who say, yeah, but the legislative branch is there to be a check, it's for checks and balances. Well, I got news for you. Most of the time, even people of the same party are going to be serving as a check and balance on the executive branch. There are many times when the executive may have a thought or an idea as to how to go about doing something, and people within their own party, their own senators, their own congressmen, are going to come along and say, yeah, but I think you're going a little too far with this. I think we're spending a little too much on this. I'm not sure we're going to get get a return on our investment, whatever the case might be. But then you also have the judicial branch, which serves as a consistent check on the legislative and the executive branches of government as well. A lot of people who don't know history are not aware of the fact that during the Great Depression, Franklin Delano Roosevelt instituted a number of programs that were designed to put people back to work. Yes, the government had to borrow money. Yes, the government was paying these people, but he was able to get much done in the way of infrastructure and national parks and all kinds of things, because he felt that in the economic environment of the Great Depression, that the government needed to step in and provide work for people so that people could eat and families could eat and not lose their homes and this sort of thing. What many people do not take into account is that 2/3 of the programs that Franklin Delano Roosevelt proposed were shot down not by the House and the Senate, but by the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court kept him in check. 2/3 of the programs he wanted to institute, the court prevented him from being able to institute on constitutional grounds. So the system of checks and balances is going to work even if the president has a cooperative House and a cooperative Senate. People bark and complain, on the Republican side, the GOP side, about debt and the deficit. They only do so when a Democrat's in office, because in my lifetime, and I'm 58 years old, in my lifetime, every single Republican president has spent us into oblivion and has increased the deficit, increased our debt over and over again. And this is simply a fact of history, folks. This is not speculation. This is a fact. So why, as a Republican, a member of the Republican base, Why you're going to sit there and let Republicans work you up into a froth over debt and over the deficit when the minute they get back into power, they're going to give out more tax cuts for the wealthiest among us, and they may throw you a breadcrumb because too many people in the Republican base respond to breadcrumbs, and our deficit goes up, our debt goes up. Nobody takes into account that the Democrats have been saying for decades, we must create a tax system that allows for the wealthiest among us to carry their fair share of the tax burden. If the Democratic Party were able to do what it's been saying for decades, you would see revenue climbing, the deficit going down. You would see the government being able to invest more in the American people. You have to understand, Republicans love to frame all spending by the government. They love to frame it as quote-unquote spending. They frame it as though we're just taking money and throwing it out the window. We're just spending money. We're just spending money. Oh my goodness, we're just spending money. And it's going out the window. And the people in the Republican base buy this hook, line, and sinker because they have no concept in the universe of how economics works. They have no concept in the world of how economics works. The Democrats, unfortunately, are not the best at messaging. And if there's anything about the Democrats that drives me up the wall, it is their failure to understand some of the most fundamental realities of effective communication. One of those realities is this: when you're saying something to somebody and they're not understanding you, if you say something to somebody and for whatever reason they're kind of looking at you and they don't quite understand what you're saying, if you keep repeating to them the same identical phrase that you've been using and you just keep saying it the same identical way over and over and over again, all you're going to do is build frustration. You are not communicating. You are not helping them to understand what you're saying. The way to effective communication, you must change the way you're saying something. If I say to you, for instance, don't you want to put a coat on? And you look at me and say, well, no, not necessarily. And I say, don't you want to put a coat on? And you look at me and, no. Don't you want to put a coat on? No. If I just keep saying to you, don't you want to put a coat on? I am foolish. I'm not communicating. But if I change up what I'm saying and I say, it's cold outside, you may want to put a coat on, all of a sudden you get what I'm saying and you get why I'm saying it, okay? Democrats for decades have been messaging on any number of issues, and they just keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And I understand what they're saying, but I also understand how that people on the other side of the aisle are not getting it. They're not understanding what is being said. And I keep waiting for the Democratic Party to change up its wording, to reword it, to begin to express it differently. For instance, when it comes to Roe v. Wade, we constantly hear about reproductive freedoms and the woman's right to choice and blah, 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 blah. And that's all well and good. But those phrases, all they do is stir up the angst of the other side. All they do is frustrate the other side and get them emotional and get them all stirred up. But if they would be more clear concerning their messaging, then the Democrats might explain, listen, we're a nation that believes in freedom and liberty. There are certain freedoms, there are certain rights which are guaranteed by the Constitution that many in the Republican Party will die for. For instance, the right to bear arms. People are dying every single day in America, not just in individual murders and shootings, but we have mass shootings going on a regular basis. Every time I turn around, I'm driving down the road, and I'm noticing that the American flag is flying at half-staff. And I'm asking Tommy, look up on Google, find out why the flag is at half-staff, because I can't. And he finds out it's because of another shooting we've had. And so, they're lowering the flag. Man, our flag is going up and down, up and down, up and down the pole constantly because there are these mass shootings going on everywhere. Now, Republicans will fight you tooth and nail over the right to bear arms and you have the right to bear arms, but where in the Constitution do you read that you have the right to bear a tank or to be in possession of nuclear weapons? No, you don't have the right to bear just any arms. No, the whole concept of what our framers wrote was that an individual has the right to have some form of personal protection, okay? And when Democrats try to come along and suggest maybe we need to write some legislation, maybe we need to curb the exact type of weapons that are available to the common man on the street, Republicans are up in arms. They're screaming and hollering and having a fit. Yet the Democrats are trying to express to the American people that when it comes to the issue of abortion, for instance, because this is an issue that is confined to a human body, to an individual's human body, government cannot rightfully step in and dictate what any human being can do with their own human body. How is that not a slippery slope that the Republicans love to talk about all the time? How is it not dangerous to begin to dictate what an individual can do with their body? You're contributing to poverty. You're contributing. Many of those children that are born are going to be born into poverty. Many of those children that are born are going to be born into abusive, negative, dysfunctional family environments. It's all well and good to try to paint everything as, but there's a way to make everything beautiful. There's a way to make everything lovely. All these children can be adopted. While there are people out there who are looking to adopt, yeah, and there are also human traffickers and child sex perverts who adopt children specifically for that purpose as well. So we can sit here and we can act like that isn't a fact and that isn't a reality, but we know from history that it is. The thing that amuses me, or I should say amazes, because I'm really not amused by it, the fundamentalists and evangelicals claim to believe that a child who dies before a certain age, they refer to it as the age of accountability, automatically goes to heaven. If they believe this, and if they believe life begins at conception, then the reality is every aborted baby, according to their belief system, immediately goes to heaven. They don't have to go through life. They don't have to hurt. They don't have to go through the pains and the struggles of life. They don't have to experience illness and disease. They don't have to experience loss, according to their own belief system. And yet they have allowed political manipulators, and that's all it's been, and that is something else I saw that caused me to leave the Republican Party. I realized that the entire issue of gay rights and abortion, this is long before I came out, long before I could ever admit to myself that I was gay. The reality is these issues were just manipulative issues. They were issues that got people really emotionally invested and really got people worked up. And when you get people worked up, guess what? One, they'll go to the polls. Two, they'll write you a check. And so they were using these issues to manipulate the religious right, and it worked. It worked perfectly. They were able to manipulate so effectively people on the religious right that they've got the religious right believing that Republicans are the righteous party. They're the representatives of godliness and righteousness, and the Democrats are wicked and evil and baby killers. Well, now, it's funny that you frame Democrats as baby killers, but you don't want to frame Republicans as supporters of mass murder. But Republicans go out of their way to protect the right of the individuals who walk into a school and kill dozens of children in a matter of a few moments' time, as well as teachers and other staff members who go to concerts and kill dozens of concert goers, people who are just trying to have a nice day out, not knowing that that day at that event their life is going to end. They will support the right of those people to have guns that can fire dozens of bullets a minute, and yet don't identify them as being, mass murderers, don't identify them as being killers, but that is the language, that is the way they frame issues when they're trying to get their base emotionally stirred up and upset with the other guy, okay? Folks, we need to use our heads a little bit. We need to think. The time is well past that we can afford to be careless in how we hear things. You need to understand there is something that is called spin. You can make the best thing in the world look bad, and you can make the worst thing in the world look good with spin. Anyone, and I'm going to finish up this little cast, and I'll be doing some others shortly on some different subject matter that I'm wanting to get done today as well. But if you've ever taken debate in high school or in college, then you understand that debate teams are given an issue, and then they are assigned sides. In other words, abortion. This side is going to be pro. It has nothing to do with how they feel about the issue. And this side is going to be against. Has nothing to do with how they feel about the issue. Debate competition is about learning how to present arguments to support any position from whatever perspective. It actually allows you to see things from a much broader perspective. You're not always looking at things with tunnel vision, only seeing what you want to see, only hearing what you want to hear. No, when you study debate, when you participate in debate in high school or in college, you learn to look at issues from both sides. That does not mean that you're not going to pick a side. That doesn't mean you're not going to have your own position on issues. People go to college all the time. We have the Republican Party today literally trying to demonize higher education and liberal schooling. And yet, interestingly enough, the vast majority of the senators and the congressmen, Ted Cruz and the like, have graduated from those very schools. And they'll say, oh, they're indoctrinating. No, they're not indoctrinating. What you're trying to do, what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to make your position much more easily forced upon the masses by removing any representation of the other side of the argument. People go to public colleges, people go to Ivy League schools all the time, very liberal institutions, and they come out of those schools and they register Republican, they vote Republican, they embrace conservative ideals. Just because you've had the other side of the coin presented to you and shown to you does not mean that you are automatically a brain-dead zombie and you're simply going to embrace, whatever Yale tells me, I'm going to believe. Whatever Princeton says, I'm going to believe. Ooh. Same thing is true of Liberty University, one of the most conservative schools in America, fundamentalist evangelical run. People come out of those schools all the time and they wind up embracing liberal policies. They wind up embracing liberal political views. So the notion that because you attend a school that leans one way or another in terms of how certain things are presented, that is going to form these young minds, that's garbage, folks. Historically, we know that is not factual. That is not what happens. The people who serve today in our Congress and in our Senate are prime examples of this. And yet, these are the same people who use these arguments to try to terrorize and influence and manipulate and control their base. And their base doesn't put any more thought into what they're hearing than deciding whether to go to the restroom or not. And they buy it. They just buy everything hook, line, and sinker, not understanding that there is spin, that you've got people who are putting their own spin on these issues. And you have got to be able to look past the spin. You've got to be able to consider both sides of the argument and come to your own conclusions. Well, I hope that perhaps this my first podcast of this nature has done some good. I hope somebody listening, whether you be liberal or whether you be conservative, I hope that you are encouraged to understand that we are not framed by influences necessarily that we have been subjected to. Many of us are examples of that ourselves. Again, I say I grew up in a fundamentalist evangelical church. It took a while, but I eventually found my own understanding and my own views, and I am where I am today, doing what I'm doing today. If you'd asked me 40 years ago if I could ever see myself doing what I'm doing today, I would have told you were out of your mind, okay? But yet, here I am. So I hope that there's been some information offered here that helps to speak a little bit of calm to you and encourages you to be a little more open-minded, to consider both sides of an argument, and then draw your own conclusions, and don't allow yourself to be manipulated. Do not allow yourself to be controlled through fear and anxiety and angst. Don't let these people get away with that. Our nation, our government is well designed. It's brilliantly designed for that matter. But my friend, it is fragile. And there is absolutely the possibility of our losing altogether our constitutional republic if we as a people are not diligent in our duties so that we can vote informed and do what's best for our nation. Not just ourselves, not just our states, but what is best for our nation. All right. I'm going to finish this one up, and I'm going to be starting another one that I think is going to be very important. This one is just kind of to lay the groundwork of what I'm wanting to do through these podcasts. But the one that I'll be starting shortly is extremely important, and I hope when you have time that you'll watch. Okay? Until we meet again, God bless you.